The Nintendo 64 is known mainly for one thing, its amazing 3D platformers like Mario 64, Banjo-Kazooie, and even Rayman 2. But one thing the Nintendo 64 library is notoriously lacking in is quality fighting games. Compared to the Saturn or the PlayStation 1, the N64 barely got any 2D or 3D fighters. There's roughly about 20 on the system, and out of these 20 or so fighting games, the ones we know for sure that are in high regard would be the obvious ones like Super Smash Bros., Mortal Kombat Trilogy, and Killer Instinct Gold. But today let's talk a bit about the road less traveled, and look at some of the underrated fighting games for the Nintendo 64. As previously stated, the N64 barely received any high-quality fighting games compared to other systems, while the PlayStation 1 and the Sega Saturn are receiving things like Tekken, Virtua Fighter, Dead or Alive, or any various Street Fighter ports. The N64 didn't receive any notable arcade ports from those companies. There were rumors of Eureka porting the first Street Fighter EX game to the 64. The rumors first appeared in the January 97 issue of Next Generation magazine, but obviously those never came to fruition. Instead, the 64 got absolute crap like War Gods, Midway's first 3D fighting game. It's very similar to MK4, and is most likely the groundwork laid for that game. It plays sort of like MK4, but covered in absolute feces, and with a three-dimensional sidestepping mechanic. Or another N64 fighting classic, Dark Rift. Again, another edgy dark fighter. This one's only saving grace is that it supposedly was a cancelled Saturn game. It got saved and ported to the 64, and was the first retail 64 game to run at 60 frames a second. But other than those tidbits, everything here feels bad. Especially the command chains. Maybe the worst offender of the 64 fighting game plague, Xena, Warrior Princess. Everything but the facial textures are pretty bad in this game. The movements are so jerky, animations just feel unfinished, and it's just not fun to play. But along with the piles of crap, there were some diamonds in the rough. The first one I'm going to talk about isn't necessarily a great game. Now, Deadly Arts is something that I would consider a good example of kusoge. Kusoge is a Japanese slang term for bad games, and it's a combination of a general curse word that means shit or damn, kuso, and the Japanese pronunciation of game, gemu. Put them together, you got kusoge. Deadly Arts, also known as GASP. Generation of Arts, Speed and Power. Fighters Next Treme. This one was released by Konami in 1998. You can control up to 8 characters at first, and it's got the most basic modes out of all the games I'm going to mention here today. But first, the gameplay. Deadly Arts isn't unlike Tekken or Virtua Fighter. You can perform directional command inputs, combo strings, and juggles, and it features actual 3D movement and sidestepping. The game even has a unique judgment feature. It grades you on whether you run away, reuse the same moves over and over again, or perform better combos than your opponent. Hell, if you're judged badly, you'll lose the round even if you have more health than your opponent. So where Deadly Arts does suffer is the fluidity, the combat, and its frame rate. Most of the animations feel too fast or jerky for the 30 FPS or sub 30 FPS frame rate that goes on here. And to be honest, it's just terrible. I feel like this makes timing combos or juggles really harder than it should be. Even a simple back and forward input feels like it's being missed because the frame rate dips. Both Virtua Fighter and Tekken have locked 60 FPS frame rates, and the gameplay feels smooth as a result. And it does show to the general public because the game did not get good reviews at the time. But I can't help but feel if 2 good Tekken or Virtua Fighter players were to spend some time with some long sessions of this game, you might get some cool matches out of it. So while it lacks the crispy controls and frame rate of the other big name fighters, it does bring a little bit of fun to the table compared to Dark Rift or War Gods. It does have one cool unique feature, the custom character mode. As you can see here, I'm making my yummy, dummy, thick, hottie tomboy girlfriend here, and I'll take her to training mode to learn new moves from the other characters. Although it's limited, it's a neat feature for the time. Another feature is the tag battle with a partner you can switch out during the fight. Again, limited, but it's cool that it's here. Deadly Arts at least tried to provide a decent experience, but it really needed some more time in development. Try it out if you're brave enough. Dual Heroes was developed by Produce, and published by Hudson Soft in late '97 for Japan, and nearly an entire year later in 1998 for America and Europe. The first thing most people notice about Dual Heroes is that all the characters basically look like knockoff Power Rangers. Well, that's because all the characters were designed by Kamen Rider and Sentai designer Keita Amamiya himself. The game is also notable for supposedly being the first fighting game to take advantage of actual analog control inputs, at least according to this article in Computer and Video Games magazine from 1997. So while this game lacks any real significant single-player content, the fighting game engine itself is where I found the game to really shine. You have full 3D movement when holding the Z button, or you can lock to your opponent's plane just like Tekken. The combo strings and animations feel much better than something like Deadly Arts. The game itself seems to run around a smooth 30 frames a second. I think the coolest feature of this game is its training mode. The AI dummy will slowly learn your habits and level up. Soon enough, the AI dummy will be able to combo and juggle you just like you were doing to them. The AI will also vary its habits in story mode, so the idea is that you won't have the same AI opponent behaviors each time you play. I think there's a lot more to enjoy here as far as a fighting game goes with Dual Heroes. The presentation and the music's pretty good as well. It's gonna keep you hyped up while you fight your friends. Speaking of fighting your friends, you can fight your friends for bragging rights in the Medal mode, which sort of works like a dog tag that you win and save to your controller pack until your friend can defeat you and take it back. If you can find Dual Heroes for cheap, do not pass it up. Flying Dragon by Culture Brain was published by Natsumi in late '97 in Japan and summer '98 in the US and Europe. For those that don't know, Flying Dragon is actually a long-running series that dates back all the way to the NES. And Flying Dragon 64 is technically two different fighting engines on the same cartridge. It's actually known as Hiryo no Ken Twin in Japan, so I'm assuming the twin stands for the two fighting engines. You have the super deformed Hiryo no Ken Cast, and the more virtual realistic engine that can play in 2D and 3D fighting modes. So let's talk about SD mode. In SD mode, the player will progress defeating enemies and gaining experience, and items to level up their fighter, or you can use items in battle to help you out. At first, your character is going to be really weak and do almost no damage. As you can see in these clips, I was winning mostly by timeout, and that's because most of my combos weren't really doing any damage. But after a little bit of grinding, I went to the treasure box and equipped the right items, and your character actually starts doing work. Now, if these RPG elements are not your cup of tea, you can switch over to the virtual mode. You can play in the 2D engine or the 3D mode engine. The 3D mode engine offers sidestepping, as opposed to the 2D mode, as well as change the inputs and movesets for the characters. Now I have to admit, in my opinion, I don't find the realistic mode as fun as the SD mode. It's almost the same level as Kusoge as Deadly Arts. And others might agree with me, because Flying Dragon did get an update in Japan, and the updated version removed the virtual mode, in favor of new quests and characters for the SD mode. But with that noted, I think it's safe to say that Flying Dragon can provide you with a lot of fun, especially if you're not super serious into fighting games. Fighters Destiny 2 was developed by Genki and released in the year 2000. Much like its predecessor, Fighters Destiny 1, it's actually much different than other 2D and 3D fighters. The focus is actually on scoring points rather than depleting your opponent's health. Points can be scored by either getting knockouts, ring outs, throwing the opponent, or using a special KO, all worth varying amounts of points. Overall, the fighting system seems a little bit more similar to something like Toe Ball 2 as opposed to Tekken, since the juggles aren't necessarily as important in Fighters Destiny 2. The graphic style is grounded, yet not too generic, and runs at a nice frame rate to boot. You can take these 9 characters at first into your typical story ladder mode, or the really cool Mario Party-esque mode, Fighters Arena. You take your character onto a board game-like map that looks a lot like Mario Party, and roll to move spaces to reach the final destination. Along the way, the Master and his helper Cherry will affect spaces with time constraints or other challenges. Once you win matches, you'll actually unlock additional moves and specials to improve your character. It's a really neat mode I like to see in other new fighters, to kind of change things up. And since this game isn't really like anything else on any other system, I think it makes it one of the most unique and best fighters on the 64.
Nothing to lose. Come on. Yes. Win 1 point.
And last but not least, we have Rakuga Kids. This is another one released by Konami, but this time it was only in Japan and Europe. Rakuga Kids is a Japanese portmanteau, Rakugaki meaning doodle, and the English word for kids. So put them together, you would get something like Doodle Kids, and the name makes sense once you see the art style of the game. Rakuga Kids is single-handedly the best use of 2D sprites that I've seen on the N64, hands down. The art style kinda reminds me of Parappa the Rapper, but the fluidity of the sprite animation running at a crispy 60 frames a second, it honestly reminds me of something that rivals the CPS2 or the Neo Geo. And it baffles me seeing this game run, knowing that Capcom never ported Street Fighter Alpha 2 to the 64, but they ported it to the SNES, that couldn't even handle the sprites. Aside from that, Rakuga Kids plays somewhat like a Capcom 6-button versus fighter, but it's extremely simplified with a larger emphasis on projectiles and special moves, as opposed to long, drawn-out combos. I assume they wanted kids to be able to mash buttons and get results. Chaining attack buttons feels just like chains in Capcom games. And launching feels like launchers in the Marvel vs. series as well. Add in some lenient damage and you have a fighting game here that almost anyone in any age range can get the hang of. The one thing is that there's not too many modes in this one, but one interesting feature is raising all the AI characters in their own training mode. The AI characters will get stronger on their own in training mode, and then you take them back to the single player story and they'll run it through, as you sit back and watch and relax. Aside from that, you still have your standard versus modes, and as far as playability goes, like I said before, anyone can get into it, so what it lacks in single player content, it does make up for in playability. Rakuga Kids is probably the best N64 fighter that no one talks about. So that's it for this video. So what other fighting games do you peeps like? Let me know in the comments and I'll see if I can add some to another video I'll make in the future. But thank you so much for watching. Do me a huge favor and follow on YouTube and Twitch, and I will see you next time.